My name's Carl Kolchak.
Hello, Carl.
Hi, Susan.
I'm Officer Cortazzo, and you're under arrest. Phil!
What?
Shame on you, Kolchak.
Kolchak. The Night Stalker is the show that invented modern supernatural television, a rumpled reporter in a straw hat and a decade-old suit, chasing monsters through the dark while the authorities covered up everything he found. But the version you watched almost never existed. Today we're uncovering 17 hidden truths about Kolchak, the Night Stalker, 1974, including the reason its most iconic scene was born from a costume decision and the X-Files secret that was hiding in plain sight for decades.
Did you know the deceased personally?
Poppy, he don't understand when people talking to him.
No, I understand. I really don't. I understand.
1. It all started with an unpublished novel nobody wanted. Jeff Rice finished writing the Kolchak Papers in 1970. The manuscript told the story of a Las Vegas newspaper reporter tracking a serial killer who turned out to be a real vampire. Rice spent months trying to find a publisher willing to take it. Nobody bit. An agent named Rick Ray eventually read it and recognized that the story wasn't a novel waiting to be published, it was a film waiting to be made. He passed it to ABC, who optioned it before a single copy had ever appeared in print. Richard Matheson, the writer behind I Am Legend and dozens of Twilight Zone episodes, was brought in to adapt it into a screenplay. Dan Curtis, fresh off Dark Shadows, was hired to produce. The combination of Rice's story, Matheson's script, and Curtis's instinct for gothic television was the match that lit everything that followed. The novel Rice couldn't sell became the foundation for one of the most influential genre franchises in American television history.
Why is that?
The two victims were killed in this apartment. Were killed for food by a vampire.
2. The 1972 TV movie became the highest-rated TV film ever made. The Night Stalker aired on ABC on January 11th, 1972. As part of the network's Movie of the Week slot, nobody predicted what happened next. It pulled a 33.2 rating and a 54 share, meaning more than half of all televisions turned on that night in America were watching Carl Kolchak chase a vampire through Las Vegas. An estimated 75 million viewers tuned in. It was the highest-rated made-for-television film in the history of the medium up to that point, beating out everything that had come before it, including the widely acclaimed Brian's Song from the previous year. Richard Matheson won a 1973 Edgar Award from the Mystery Writers of America for his screenplay. The film was shot in just 12 days on a modest budget. Its success was so complete and so unexpected that ABC immediately commissioned a sequel and then began pushing for an ongoing series. A TV movie that cost almost nothing to make became the foundation for a franchise that would reshape how American television approached the supernatural. 3. Darren McGavin invented Kolchak's costume from scratch. The original script by Richard Matheson described Kolchak wearing Bermuda shorts and a Hawaiian shirt. McGavin read it, looked up from the page, and said that didn't sound like anyone he knew. He went his own way. McGavin developed a backstory for the character in his own head. He decided Kolchak was a New York newspaper reporter who had been fired in the summer of 1962, fired in the middle of a heat wave while wearing a seersucker suit, a straw pork pie hat, a Brooks Brothers shirt, and tennis shoes. And he hadn't bought a single piece of clothing since. The costume wasn't just characterization. There was a practical reason, too. Because the show filmed almost entirely at night, McGavin chose the white seersucker specifically so the camera could pick him up in dark locations every time Kolchak appeared on screen. Straw hat, cheap suit, sneakers. It was because Darren McGavin had quietly redesigned the character from the ground up before anyone on the production realized it. 4. The series premiered the same night as the Rockford Files, Kolchak. The Night Stalker launched on ABC's Friday night schedule on September 13, 1974. It was up against a stacked lineup on NBC. And on that exact same night, a show called The Rockford Files premiered on the competing network. Two of the most fondly remembered television series of the 1970s began their runs on the same Friday nights. Both featured unconventional, rumpled, wisecracking protagonists who fought the system and usually lost. Both developed devoted cult followings that outlasted their original broadcast runs by decades. The competition didn't help either show. Kolchak was placed in a notoriously difficult Friday night slot with little network promotion behind it. ABC gave it minimal marketing support and paired it against some of NBC's most reliable programming. The show that had been the talk of television 2 years earlier as a film was now being treated by its own network as a disposable piece of the schedule. 5. Darren McGavin wore a full hairpiece for the entire run of the series. For every episode of Kolchak, the Night Stalker, Darren McGavin wore a full hairpiece. This was never publicly acknowledged during the show's original broadcast, and most viewers watching at home had no idea. The straw hats that became Kolchak's signature look served secondary practical purpose. It concealed the hairpiece beneath it during outdoor and active scenes. McGavin was meticulous about his appearance on screen and the consistency of the character's look across every episode. The hairpiece, the hat, the suit, and the sneakers were all part of a single unified visual identity he had built himself from the moment he took the role. It's one of those invisible production details that only becomes remarkable in retrospect. A character whose defining visual quality was his complete indifference to his own appearance was being maintained across 20 episodes by a precise and carefully managed costume and makeup regimen. The dishevelment was completely deliberate. 6. Richard Matheson and Dan Curtis both turned down the TV series. When ABC and Universal decided to expand Kolchak into a weekly series, the natural move was to bring back the people who had made the original film work. Dan Curtis, who had produced both TV movies, was approached. Richard Matheson, who had written both scripts, was approached. Both said no. Their objection was the format itself. Neither man was interested in writing or producing a Monster of the Week show. The two TV movies had worked because each story was self-contained and built around a specific, carefully constructed supernatural threat. The idea of producing that on an assembly line, a new creature every 7 days, no connective tissue, no narrative development, held no appeal for either of them. The series went forward without them. Without Curtis's gothic discipline and Matheson's structural rigor, the show became exactly the kind of production they had been worried about. Fast, cheap, uneven, and increasingly reliant on recycled monster concepts. The two men who built the franchise's creative foundation watched it be turned into a product they didn't recognize. 7. The show was shot from 3 in the afternoon until just before sunrise. The production schedule of Kolchak, The Night Stalker, was unlike almost anything else on American television at the time. Because the majority of the show's action took place at night, Kolchak chasing monsters through dark alleys, cemeteries, warehouses, and sewers. The entire production operated on a nocturnal schedule. Cameras rolled starting at 3 in the afternoon. Filming continued straight through the night and wrapped just before sunrise, day after day, episode after episode. 20 episodes in a single season. Darren McGavin later described the production as turning in wet negatives, meaning episodes were being aired almost as soon as they were finished, with no time for reshoots, revision, or anything approaching a polish pass. The exhaustion this schedule produced was a major factor in what ultimately ended the show. McGavin was working as both the lead actor and uncredited as a de facto executive producer, carrying creative responsibilities the production never formally acknowledged while running on almost no sleep. 8. McGavin was the uncredited executive producer and nobody admitted it. When ABC and Universal negotiated with Darren McGavin to return as Kolchak for the series, part of the agreement was that he would take on producing responsibilities behind the scenes. He would have creative input on scripts, casting, and the overall direction of the show. The credit was never given to him on screen. McGavin served as the effective executive producer of Kolchak, The Night Stalker, for its entire run, without a single on-screen acknowledgement that he was doing so. This arrangement meant that McGavin was simultaneously playing the lead role in every episode, working a nocturnal filming schedule from mid-afternoon until just before dawn, and carrying the creative responsibility of a producer without the formal title, authority, or compensation that position should have come with. The combination of physical exhaustion, creative frustration, and institutional invisibility, doing the work of 3 jobs while being credited for 1, became unsustainable. It was one of the core reasons he eventually asked to be released from his contract. 9. The creator of The Sopranos wrote for the show. Among the writers who contributed scripts to Kolchak, The Night Stalker's single season was a young television writer named David Chase. He wrote for the series before he had any significant profile in the industry. Years before, he went on to create one of the most acclaimed dramas in the history of American television. Chase would eventually create The Sopranos for HBO, winning multiple Emmy Awards and reshaping what television drama was capable of. He would later reflect on his time working on Kolchak in interviews, acknowledging the experience as part of his early career development. It's a remarkable footnote. The writer who would one day produce Tony Soprano spent part of his early career writing Monster of the Week scripts for a show about a rumpled reporter in a straw hat chasing supernatural creatures through Chicago. Kolchak. The Night Stalker is, among many other things, a small entry in the biography of the man who reinvented American prestige television. 10. Richard Kiel played 2 different monsters in back-to-back episodes before Richard Kiel became internationally famous as the steel-toothed assassin Jaws. In The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, he appeared in Kolchak, The Night Stalker, twice. In consecutive episodes, he played the Diablero, the Aztec spirit creature, in the episode Bad Medicine. Then he returned the following week as Père Malfait, a swamp creature in the Spanish Moss Murders. The same actor. 2 different monsters, back to back. The practical reason was budget. Kiel was available. He was physically imposing at 7'2", and the production could use him efficiently across multiple episodes. His presence sold the threat convincingly, without requiring elaborate monster suits to do the heavy lifting. The face that would later loom over Roger Moore in 2 James Bond films was, for a brief stretch in 1974, lurking in the sewers and bayous of Carl Kolchak's Chicago. 7 feet of uncanny menace working for a fraction of the cost of building a more elaborate creature. 11. The show was set in Chicago but filmed almost entirely in Los Angeles. Kolchak. The Night Stalker was set in Chicago, a city with its own distinctive architecture, geography, and atmosphere that gave the show a specific identity. Some exterior filming was done in Chicago during the summer and early fall before production ramped up. After that, the show was shot almost entirely in Los Angeles and on the Universal Studios lot. The switch was a standard television economy. Chicago location filming was expensive, logistically complicated, and at odds with the brutal overnight production schedule the show was running. Universal's backlot could stand in for almost any American city, and the nocturnal shooting style, steep shadows, narrow angles, deliberate visual ambiguity, helped obscure the substitution in most episodes. Some episodes hide the doubling more successfully than others. For viewers who knew Chicago well, certain establishing shots were obviously wrong, but the show's atmosphere was thick enough that most audiences accepted it. The city of Chicago gave Kolchak its identity. The city of Los Angeles gave it its exterior locations. 12. Jeff Rice sued over the TV series because nobody asked him. When ABC and Universal decided to expand Kolchak into a weekly series, they moved forward without contacting Jeff Rice, the man whose novel had started everything. Rice had only optioned the Kolchak papers for the original TV movie. He had not granted anyone the rights to turn his character into a television series. He sued. The lawsuit moved forward through the legal system as the series went into production and moved toward its September 1974 premiere. It was resolved just before the show aired. Rice received an on-screen credit as series creator, like a formal acknowledgement of his authorship that the production had tried to proceed without. The novel he had spent years failing to get published was now the basis of a franchise that had bypassed him twice. The first TV movie had made it to air before the book could. The series had gone into production before anyone thought to call him. Rice eventually got his credit. He did not get much else. The legal fight over a story nobody wanted to publish had to be fought twice, once to find an audience, once to keep the rights. 13. The show was canceled because McGavin asked to be let go. Kolchak, The Night Stalker, was not canceled by the network. It was canceled because Darren McGavin asked to be released from his contract. The distinction matters. ABC had not turned on the show. The ratings, while not spectacular, were sufficient to continue. The network had not decided to pull the plug. McGavin made the decision himself, and the show ended because its lead actor, who was also its uncredited producer and its primary creative engine, had reached his limits. The schedule had worn him down. The scripts had disappointed him consistently. The gap between what Kolchak could have been, the careful, atmospheric horror he had seen in the 2 TV movies, and what it had become in weekly production had never closed. 3 scripts were finished and in various stages of development when he made the call. Those scripts were never produced. 2 of them eventually became issues of the Kolchak comic book series in 2003. The show simply stopped mid-momentum because the man at the center of it refused to keep going. 14. Chris Carter built the X-Files on Kolchak's foundation. Chris Carter was 11 years old when the Night Stalker TV movie aired in 1972. He watched it alone. He was terrified. He never forgot it. When he created the X-Files for Fox in 1993, he was asked repeatedly whether shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits had been his primary influences. Carter was precise about the answer. Those shows were about 10% of the inspiration, he said. Kolchak was 30%. The rest was original instinct. The structural DNA is obvious in retrospect. A lone investigator chasing the truth that authorities suppress. A skeptical partner who respects the investigator without fully believing. Monsters encountered once and never acknowledged again. Government institutions that bury evidence. The X-Files didn't invent those conventions. It inherited them from a rumpled reporter in a straw hat who had already been doing all of it for 20 episodes on a nocturnal shooting schedule 20 years earlier. 15. Chris Carter wanted McGavin to play Kolchak on the X-Files, and McGavin said no. Carter's admiration for Kolchak was deep enough that when he had the opportunity to cast Darren McGavin on the X-Files, he went straight for what he really wanted. He asked McGavin to appear as Carl Kolchak himself, to create a formal shared universe between the 2 shows, with Kolchak as the acknowledged ancestor of Mulder and Scully's work. McGavin declined. He didn't want to reprise the character. Carter came back with a second offer, this time asking McGavin to play Fox Mulder's father, Bill. McGavin turned that down, too. Carter eventually wrote a third role. Arthur Dales, a retired FBI agent described on screen as the father of the X-Files unit who had been investigating paranormal cases long before Mulder was born. McGavin accepted that version. He appeared in multiple episodes. The character was, to anyone paying attention, unmistakably Kolchak by another name, like an old man who had seen things nobody believed, buried in records nobody wanted to read, sitting quietly at the edge of a mythology that had grown up around his life's work. 16. Stephen King dismissed the series, and the show's fans never forgave him. In his 1981 nonfiction book Dance Macabre, a study of the horror genre across fiction, film, and television, Stephen King addressed Kolchak. The Night Stalker. He was not kind. King derided the series, dismissing its quality and its value as genre television. The show's fans took the criticism personally and remembered it for decades. Media critics and horror historians largely disagreed with King's assessment. NPR's David Bianculli went on record calling it one of the best fantasy series ever to air on American television. Mystery and film historian Stuart Kaminsky made similar arguments in print. The irony is that the show King dismissed directly influenced the television format that produced some of the most significant supernatural storytelling of the following decades. The X-Files, Supernatural, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Fringe, and Millennium all carry structural and tonal debts to the thing King waved away. Kolchak's reputation has improved substantially in the years since. King's assessment of it has not aged especially well. 17. The show was set 6 months after Watergate, and it showed. Kolchak. The Night Stalker premiered on September 13, 1974, roughly 6 weeks after Richard Nixon had resigned the presidency following the Watergate scandal. The country was in a state of raw, unresolved distrust toward institutions and authority figures. The show had been built on exactly that distrust. Every episode followed the same essential structure. Kolchak discovers a supernatural threat, does the work to expose it, and then has the truth buried by police departments, city officials, editors, and federal agencies who refused to acknowledge what actually happened. The story always ended the same way. Kolchak wins the monster fight. The cover-up wins everything else. For an audience that had spent 2 years watching their president deny, obfuscate, and ultimately flee the truth, a show about a reporter who was always right and always silenced hit differently than it would have in any other era. One reviewer noted at the time that the show premiered 1 month after Watergate forced a president to resign, and that the timing wasn't coincidental. Kolchak didn't feel like genre fantasy in 1974. It felt like the news. Kolchak asked one question every week for a single season and never got to finish asking it. What's out there? And who's making sure you never find out? Drop your favorite episode in the comments. And if Kolchak is new to you, subscribe, because there's a lot more in the dark worth tracking down.